The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Vanderbilt auction house in Manhattan, creating rivers that distorted the glow of the city lights outside. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, New York's elite gathered in their finest attire. Designer gowns rustled against tailored suits, champagne flutes clinked, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and even more expensive egos. Marcus Chen stood near the back of the Grand Hall, his appearance unremarkable among the peacocks. He wore a simple gray suit, well-made but not ostentatious, and his black hair was slightly disheveled from the rain. At 42, he had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him, which was exactly how he preferred it. His dark eyes, however, told a different story. They held the sharp intelligence of someone who had built an empire from nothing, someone who understood that true power whispered rather than shouted. The auction was for the Meridian Collection, a legendary assortment of 19th-century maritime artifacts that had belonged to the late shipping magnate Harold Westbrook. The crown jewel was an ornate sextant once owned by a famous explorer, rumored to be worth upward of $3 million. But Marcus wasn't here for the sextant. He was here for something far more personal, something the auction catalog had barely mentioned. Lot 47, a weathered leather journal with brass clasps. As he moved toward his assigned seat, a sharp elbow caught him in the ribs. Marcus stumbled slightly, nearly dropping his paddle. "Watch where you're going," a voice dripped with condescension. Marcus looked up to find himself face to face with Damien Castellano, heir to the Castellano real estate fortune. Damien was everything Marcus appeared not to be. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having to prove himself. His tailored Italian suit probably cost $15,000, and his Rolex caught the chandelier light with every dismissive gesture. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, straightening his jacket. Damien looked him up and down with barely concealed contempt. "This is a private auction, friend. I think you might have wandered in from the wrong event. The charity dinner for, what do they call it? Emerging entrepreneurs. That's probably downstairs." The woman on Damien's arm, a stunning redhead in an emerald dress, giggled behind her manicured hand. Several nearby patrons turned to watch the exchange, their expressions ranging from amusement to secondhand embarrassment. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment, the same feeling he'd carried his entire life. Growing up in a cramped apartment in Chinatown, the son of immigrants who worked 16-hour days at their small grocery store, he'd learned early that people made assumptions. They saw his face, his background, and decided who he was before he opened his mouth. Even now, after everything he'd built, the sting remained. "I'm in the right place," Marcus replied evenly, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. Damien smirked. "Sure you are. Just try not to bump into anyone important, all right? Some of these people are actually here to bid, not to gawk." Before Marcus could respond, an elderly woman in a wheelchair approached, her nurse guiding her carefully through the crowd. Damien, absorbed in his own performance, stepped backward, without looking, directly into the woman's path. Marcus moved instinctively, his hand shooting out to steady the wheelchair before it could be knocked aside. "Careful," he said softly. The elderly woman looked up at him with kind, watery blue eyes. "Thank you, young man. Not many people pay attention anymore." "Are you all right, Mrs. Westbrook?" her nurse asked, concern evident in her voice. Marcus's breath caught. Mrs. Westbrook, Harold Westbrook's widow. She was the reason the collection was being auctioned in the first place. "I'm fine, dear," the old woman assured her nurse before turning back to Marcus. "You have kind eyes. They remind me of my Harold's. He always said you could tell everything about a person by whether they helped someone who couldn't help them back." Damien had already moved on, oblivious to what had nearly happened, laughing loudly with his companion about some yacht club incident. "Please, let me know if there's anything you need this evening," Marcus said to Mrs. Westbrook. She patted his hand with her papery fingers. "You're sweet. I hope you find what you're looking for tonight." As she was wheeled away, Marcus made his way to his seat, number 247, near the middle of the hall. He placed his paddle on his lap and waited, his mind drifting back to the reason he was really here. The journal. The auctioneer, a distinguished man in his 60s with a voice like aged scotch, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this extraordinary evening. The Meridian Collection represents not just maritime history, but a testament to American ambition and exploration. We'll begin with Lot 1, a brass compass dated 1847. The bidding commenced, and Marcus watched the theater unfold. Paddles raised, numbers climbed, winners preened. The crowd was energized, competitive, each item a trophy to be won. The sextant went for $4.2 million to a hedge fund manager, who looked like he'd never seen the ocean outside of his Connecticut beach house. Hours passed. Marcus bid occasionally on smaller items, nothing that would draw attention, always stopping before the price became memorable. He was establishing a pattern, becoming part of the wallpaper. It was a technique he'd perfected over years of business negotiations. Never let them see you coming. Finally, as the evening was winding down and some attendees were already heading for the exits, the auctioneer announced, Lot 47, a leather-bound journal circa 1920, origin unknown, salvaged from the Westbrook estate's storage. We'll start the bidding at $500. Marcus's heart rate increased, though his expression remained neutral. 500 was nothing. The journal had barely been mentioned in the promotional materials. Most people here had no idea what they were looking at, but Marcus knew. Before we continue with this incredible story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments below. Are you joining us from New York, London, Tokyo, or somewhere else entirely? We love hearing from our global community. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next incredible tale. We bring you new stories every week that will surprise, move, and inspire you. Now let's get back to Marcus and that mysterious journal. 500! A bored voice called from the front. A woman in pearls, bidding out of habit rather than interest. 600! Someone else counted lazily. Marcus raised his paddle. 1,000. A few heads turned. The jump was unusual but not shocking. The bids continued climbing slowly. 1,500. 2,000. Most people assumed someone saw decorative value, a nice antique for a study. Then Damien Castellano raised his paddle. 5,000. Marcus's stomach dropped, but he kept his face blank. Why would Damien be interested in the journal? He'd shown no interest in any of the smaller maritime pieces all evening. 6,000. Marcus countered, his voice steady. Damien glanced back, eyes narrowing when he recognized Marcus. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. 10,000. The room went quiet. 10,000 for a forgotten journal was absurd. The auctioneer looked pleasantly surprised. We have 10,000. Do I hear 11? Marcus understood immediately. Damien didn't care about the journal. He was bidding out of spite, punishing the man who dared to be in his space earlier. It was a game to him. A way to flex his financial muscle and humiliate someone he perceived as beneath him. 15,000, Marcus said calmly. Damien laughed. 25,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People were pulling out their phones, checking the catalog, trying to understand what they were missing, what made this journal worth so much. Marcus felt sweat forming at his collar, but his voice remained level. 50,000! The crowd erupted in whispers. The auctioneer was grinning now, thrilled by the unexpected drama. 50,000! Do I hear 60? Damien stood up, turning to face Marcus directly. The entire room watched. $100,000, he announced loudly, his voice dripping with mockery. For a dusty old book. His companion giggled again, though less certainly now. Even she seemed to realize this had gone beyond casual cruelty into something darker. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. 100,000. It was nothing compared to his actual wealth. He could bid $1 million, $10 million if necessary. But that wasn't the point. If he revealed the journal's true value by continuing to bid aggressively, he'd create a feeding frenzy. Other bidders would jump in, sensing blood in the water. The price would skyrocket, not because of the journal's worth, but because of the spectacle. He needed to think strategically. Marcus stood slowly, his paddle still in hand. He looked directly at Damien, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He walked toward the exit. The crowd murmured in confusion. Was he giving up? Damien's face split into a triumphant grin. That's what I thought, he called after Marcus. Know your place. The auctioneer looked uncertainly between Marcus's retreating back and Damien. We have 100,000 from paddle 189. Going once. Marcus stopped at the door. He turned back, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the entire hall. It wasn't loud, but it commanded attention in a way Damien's bluster never could. $250,000. The room exploded. People were standing now, phones out, recording. The auctioneer looked like he might faint from joy. 250,000! We have 250,000! Damien's face went red. His jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this, hadn't thought someone dressed so modestly could match him. 300,000, he snarled. Marcus didn't hesitate. 500,000. Now even Damien's companion looked worried, tugging at his sleeve. But Damien shook her off. His pride was on the line. his reputation. He couldn't let some nobody outbid him in front of everyone. 750,000, Damien practically shouted. Marcus walked slowly back into the room, and the crowd parted for him like water. He stopped in the center aisle, directly under a chandelier, its light creating a halo effect. When he spoke, his voice was quiet again, almost conversational. $1 million. The silence was deafening. Even the auctioneer seemed frozen. $1 million for a journal that had been estimated at maybe 2,000. Damien's face cycled through several colors. His hands shook slightly. His companion whispered urgently in his ear. He looked around the room, seeing the phones recording, knowing that if he backed down now, this moment would follow him forever at every club, every dinner party, every boardroom. But if he continued, he'd be spending over $1 million on something he didn't want, didn't understand, purely out of spite. 1.2 million, he said, but his voice cracked slightly. Marcus tilted his head, studying Damien with an expression that might have been pity. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call, right there in the middle of the auction house. "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need you to transfer funds from the primary account." "Yes, for the acquisition. 5 million should cover it." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm sure. Execute it now." He hung up and looked at the auctioneer. $5 million. Final bid. The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting, standing on chairs to see better, frantically typing on their phones. The story was already spreading across social media. "Mystery bidder pays millions for unknown journal at Westbrook auction." Damien stood frozen, his face ashen. His companion had already slipped away, embarrassed to be associated with him. 5 million. He could afford it technically, but it would require liquidating assets, explaining to his father, justifying the expense. And for what? A journal he didn't even want. He looked at Marcus with pure hatred in his eyes, but slowly, humiliatingly, he lowered his paddle. $5 million, the auctioneer said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "Going once, going twice." He slammed his gavel down. "Sold to paddle 247. The applause was thunderous. Marcus stood quietly in the center of the chaos, his expression unchanged. He'd won, but there was no triumph in his face, only a deep, quiet satisfaction. As the crowd pressed forward, trying to get closer to him, asking questions, snapping photos, Marcus felt a hand on his arm. He turned to find Mrs. Westbrook in her wheelchair, her nurse having navigated through the crowd. "That was quite a show," she said, her blue eyes twinkling. "I apologize if I've created a circus around your husband's collection," Marcus said sincerely. She waved her hand dismissively. "Harold would have loved it. He always said the best auctions were the ones where people fought for what they truly wanted, not just what was expensive." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "That journal meant something to you, didn't it? Not just as an investment." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "My grandfather. He worked on one of your husband's ships in the 1950s. He was a mechanic, kept the engines running. He used to tell me stories about those voyages, about the places they went, the things they saw. He said it changed his life, gave him purpose." Mrs. Westbrook's eyes widened with recognition. "Chen, your grandfather was Robert Chen? You knew him?" "Harold spoke of him often, said he was the best engineer he ever employed. When the ship hit that storm off Cape Horn, your grandfather worked for 36 hours straight to keep the engines functioning. Harold said he saved everyone's lives." She reached into a small bag on her wheelchair and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a younger Harold Westbrook, shaking hands with a Chinese man in work clothes, both men grinning widely. Marcus took the photo with trembling hands. "I've never seen this before. Your grandfather was supposed to write his memoirs, you know. Harold encouraged him, even gave him a journal to record his experiences, but I don't think he ever finished it. After Robert passed, we lost track of the journal. It ended up in storage with so many other things." She smiled. "I'm glad it's found its way home." Marcus felt tears prickling at his eyes, something he never allowed himself in public. "He died when I was 15. I became obsessed with his stories, with proving that someone like me from where I came from could make something of themselves. I built my first business with money I saved working at my parents' grocery store. Every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I thought of my grandfather on those ships, doing impossible things. And now you're here, paying $5 million for his journal," Mrs. Westbrook said softly. "I think he'd be very proud." As they spoke, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Security guards were escorting someone out. Marcus turned to see Damien Castellano arguing loudly, his face red with anger and humiliation. He pointed at Marcus. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my family is? This isn't over." One of the security guards said something quietly, and Damien's face went even redder. He stormed out, and the crowd immediately began buzzing with speculation and gossip. An impeccably dressed woman approached Marcus, her smile sharp and calculating. "Mr. Chen, is it? I'm Veronica Ashford from the New York Times. Everyone's wondering, who are you exactly? What made that journal worth $5 million? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. For years, he'd kept his success quiet, preferring to work behind the scenes. He'd built a technology company that revolutionized supply chain logistics, making billions but avoiding the spotlight. He'd purchased struggling businesses and turned them profitable, creating thousands of jobs but never taking public credit. He'd done it all while people like Damien dismissed him, underestimated him, treated him as invisible. But standing here, with his grandfather's journal about to be in his hands, Marcus realized something. Invisibility was a choice, so was visibility. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for people to understand that worth wasn't determined by the volume of your voice or the flash of your suit. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said clearly. "I'm the CEO and founder of Streamline Global Logistics. The journal belonged to my grandfather, Robert Chen, who worked as a marine engineer for Harold Westbrook. He was an immigrant, a man who came to this country with nothing and built a life through hard work and dignity. That journal represents his legacy, and no amount of money was too much to preserve it." Veronica's eyes widened in recognition. Streamline Global. She pulled out her phone, quickly searching. Marcus Chen, net worth estimated at $8.3 billion, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. And she'd never heard of him, because he actively avoided publicity. "You're that Marcus Chen?" she breathed. "But you're always described as reclusive, camera-shy. Why reveal yourself now?" Marcus glanced at where Damien had exited. "Because someone reminded me tonight that staying invisible can be mistaken for weakness. And I think my grandfather would want people to know that the man who saved that ship, who kept those engines running, who did the work no one else wanted to do, matters. His story matters." The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting a piece of this suddenly much more interesting story. But Mrs. Westbrook tapped her wheelchair's armrest, and somehow the sound cut through the noise. "Give the man some space," she said firmly, her voice carrying surprising authority. "He came here for a journal, not to be a circus attraction." She looked at Marcus warmly. "Come see me tomorrow, Mr. Chen. I have more photographs, some letters Harold and your grandfather exchanged. I think you should have them." Marcus bowed slightly, a gesture of respect his grandfather had taught him. "I would be honored, Mrs. Westbrook. Thank you." As the crowd finally began to disperse, still buzzing with the evening's unexpected drama, Marcus completed his payment arrangements. The auction house staff treated him with newfound deference, falling over themselves to accommodate him. He found it both amusing and sad. He was the same person he'd been when he walked in, when Damien had shoved him aside. Only the context had changed. Finally, after what felt like hours of paperwork and documentation, a staff member carefully brought out the journal. It was exactly as Marcus remembered from the catalog photo. Weathered brown leather, brass clasps tarnished with age, pages yellowed but intact. He took it with reverent hands. As he stepped out into the rain, now a light drizzle, Marcus opened the journal's first page. His grandfather's handwriting, slightly shaky but determined, filled the paper. "They say an engine is just metal and oil, gears and combustion, but I think an engine is more like a heart. It must be strong to survive storms. It must be steady to guide others home. It must work even when no one is watching. Especially then. Perhaps people are engines too. This is my story of trying to be a good engine." Marcus smiled, wiping rain or maybe tears from his face. He climbed into the back of his waiting car, a modest sedan rather than the limousines that lined the street. "Where to, Mr. Chen?" his driver asked. "Home," Marcus said, still reading. "But take the long way, through Chinatown." As the car pulled away from the Vanderbilt auction house, Marcus Chen, billionaire, held his grandfather's journal close to his chest. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched the city pass by, all the people rushing through their lives, making assumptions, judging books by covers, never imagining the stories hidden beneath ordinary surfaces. Somewhere behind him, Damien Castellano was probably drowning his humiliation in expensive whiskey, spinning the story to salvage his pride. The gossip would spread through elite circles. The time he'd been outbid by billions, literally, after mocking a man at an auction. But Marcus wasn't thinking about Damien. He was thinking about a young immigrant mechanic who'd worked on ships, who'd saved lives, who'd dreamed of his grandson having opportunities he never had. He was thinking about how that mechanic had been invisible too, how people had looked through him, dismissed him, until the moment they needed him to keep the engine running, to keep them alive. "We're engines," Marcus whispered to the journal, working even when no one is watching, especially then. The car turned onto Canal Street, and through the rain, Marcus could see the lights of Chinatown reflecting off wet pavement, the street vendors packing up for the night, the small grocery stores closing their doors. Somewhere in one of those cramped apartments above the shops, there was probably a kid doing homework at a kitchen table, dreaming of something bigger, wondering if people like him belonged in rooms with crystal chandeliers. Marcus made a mental note to increase his scholarship fund, to reach out to more community centers, to tell his own story more publicly, not for ego, but so that Kid and thousands like him would know, you belong everywhere. Your grandfather's work matters. Your story matters. You matter. And sometimes, the best revenge against those who try to make you small isn't anger or bitterness. It's living so fully, so authentically, so successfully on your own terms that their judgment becomes irrelevant. It's winning, not by destroying them, but by refusing to let them define you. The journal was worth $5 million to Marcus Chen, but the lesson was priceless. Never let anyone tell you where you don't belong, and never forget that the most powerful people in any room aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones paying attention, helping the person in the wheelchair, quietly building empires while everyone else is busy making noise. Marcus opened the journal to a random page, and his grandfather's words jumped out at him. Today, Mr. Westbrook asked me why I work so hard, why I care so much about these engines when I'm just the mechanic. I told him, because someone is trusting me to get them home. Because doing work well, any work, with dignity and pride, that's how we become more than what people expect. That's how we become unforgettable. Marcus Chen smiled in the back of his modest sedan, clutching a $5 million journal, having just revealed himself as a billionaire to protect his grandfather's legacy. And somewhere in the universe he hoped Robert Chen was smiling too, proud that his engine of a grandson had kept running, kept working, kept mattering, even when no one was watching, especially then.